Hi, welcome to the Grizzled Geologist podcast. I'm back. I'm here with my buddy Wyatt Wick. Worked with him at Revolution. Before we get started, things are changing on my end a little bit. Don't want to get into it too much yet, but if you need help with any of your projects, still feel free to reach out. I'm available, or I can put you in touch with the right people. Make sure that you visit my YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel, hit the like, hit the notification bell. Visit my website if you'd like to come on the show. Like I say, things are changing in my life a little bit, but the podcast isn't going anywhere. In fact, it should just keep getting better. People keep wanting to come on, but I think it's important that I continue to make the call out for people, engineers, geologists, landmen, anybody in the oil business, and maybe even if you're not, feel free to reach out. But today, like I said, I got my buddy Wyatt Wick. We worked together for quite a while. You're my next door neighbor for a considerable amount of time. We know each other really well. But he is a reservoir engineer in the strictest sense of the word. That, like geologists, can carry many different connotations, meanings, and workflows. And also, like myself, and the reason we worked out so well at Revolution is because we're kind of the Swiss Army knives of our particular disciplines. You know, I cross over from exploration and ops, and he kind of does the same thing with subsurface and the economic aspect. So Wyatt, after that kind of long monologue by me there, why don't you tell everybody about yourself, give yourself a little introduction, and let's get going.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here, Keith. I go way back to my time. I went to University of Oklahoma. I got my engineering degrees from there. I got a bachelor's and a master's degree from the university, and graduated in 2015 or so with the master's degree. And the master's was focused on experimental rock physics and petrophysics. That's kind of what I did that in. I joined the workforce. So I worked for Continental Resources in Oklahoma City for a number of years. I always worked in North Dakota at the Bakken for them. That's what I worked for those guys. And followed the traditional reservoir career path. It's got thrown into an asset, had a rig to keep busy, had to run economics, type curves, present all this work to the executives. I got moved into their reservoir studies group, which is more RTA, PTA, reservoir simulation type stuff, PVT. Got to do that for a while. Ultimately, I ended up in their petrophysics group where I wrote the petrophysical equation set for North Dakota. I assume it's different now, but at the time, that's what we used was that petrophysical model.
And I'll jump in real quick, and I definitely want you to finish your introduction. But yeah, that's one of the coolest things, and that was a huge value add to Revolution. Anytime I have a buddy that knows how to do it, it's great too. Yeah, the petrophysics is a big deal, and I think we'll probably touch back on that as we get into kind of our Reservoir 101 discussion that we want to have. Yeah, the petrophysics is a big deal, and that factored into what we were doing.
Yeah, petrophysics is a neat discipline. You meet some really interesting people.
Yeah, sure. You do in all these disciplines.
You really do. So I left Continental and I joined Revolution with you guys, and I did reservoir engineering proper for Revolution. Mm-hmm. Worked next door to you, to Scott, some of the other guys. Really good time. Revolution, we crushed it pretty well. And I left there about a year ago, and I'm kind of doing my own thing right now, drilling wells in North Dakota in the Bakken.
Yeah, and you've been having, it seems like, some pretty good success and growth up there in particular. The growth part's kind of fun.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, we did, myself and my partner Clark, we did some grassroots leasing. We identified a prospect, the classic exploration work, find a prospect, go lease it.
Yeah, no, and this is a great story. This is kind of how you do it, Why don't you just just a minute, talk about kind of how you did that, get the leases, put it together, sell it.
Yeah. So it's a process. Started with, you got to do the work. You got to do the subsurface work, right?
Yeah.
And I'm by no means an expert in geographics, but, use geographics, use that petrophysical model, map the basin, pick the tops, and trying to figure out where there's little places that things were missed. And everything in this industry, there's growth, there's change over time. We get better drilling wells over time. We're faster, we're more efficient, cheaper. And the same thing with simulations. And that's really what I looked for was, there's generational changes. It's a continuum, but you discretize things. But you kind of look for more places that didn't go through the transformation from, in North Dakota, 1,000 pounds a foot job is a big job up there. In other basins, it's not. But I'll tell you, that's a big job. Historically, these wells got completed with 30 stages, 300 pounds a foot. I mean, they're just little baby things.
Yeah.
And so where did that not happen? That's what I looked for. We found it, had a landman. He went out there and leased it. And about a year ago, did a whole road show, hit the road and tried to raise some money. And pretty fortunate. We were able to raise the money to drill 3 wells last year.
That's awesome.
And drilling 9 wells this year. Next year looks like even more.
I mean, Wyatt, let's be real, dude. That's a huge success story, man. Like a couple of us, I've been over here in the geologic pit of despair for the last year. You know how it is. But no, obviously we've stayed in touch, and I've watched you kind of working on this. And honest to God, it's a really awesome success story, dude. I'm proud of you. I'd like to take a page out of your book. Honestly, that you did a really good job with that. That's pretty cool, dude. Hats off to you, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's one of those things where you got to have thick skin.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm sure you got told no a lot, had to take some personal risks financially, I'm sure too.
That's the hard part. I mean, you're without a salary for a long period of time, which is why
Yeah.
Revolution was nice.
Yeah.
We did really well there, and that afforded me the ability to take that risk to go out and
Yeah.
try to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, it's a big deal, dude, and that's really great. You've got quite a extensive and successful history there. So, well, that's great, dude. So Reservoir 101. I've got guests on here and we're trying to touch on different aspects of the business and different people. I've had geologists and people from the field and mudloggers and, geosteerers and recruiters and everything else. But I need to get a reservoir engineer. So here we are. And actually, Miles is going to come on too as kind of my drilling compadre. But so, yeah, I wanted to talk to the audience a little bit about what reservoir engineers do in the business. And really, they're one of the keystone and foundational pieces. I'm going to let Wyatt take it from here. So why don't you give us a little breakdown on what is a reservoir engineer?
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy question. There's a lot of different avenues you can take with reservoir engineering. Philosophically speaking, we're project managers, we're finance guys, subsurface, do some pretty heavy math at times if we want to.
Yep.
The main role that I see in reservoir engineering is quantification. Like our job as engineers is to quantify things. And a geologist, subsurface, those things are inherently unquantifiable. I mean, if you think about what are the things that really matter to making a good oil field? Something simple like porosity, right? We don't actually measure porosity. We measure a lot of things and then infer porosity from it, but we don't actually measure.
Yeah, that's
so there's
correct.
this inherent uncertainty around things that you have to overcome so that you can put a number to it. And that number could be something like oil in place. It could be net present value. It could be rate of return. Like there's all of these things in there that's where you're trying to get to.
And that the fundamental theme of all of those things is how much money is there, right?
But that's what it has to all roll up into. The primary job of an oil company is to make money. And we make money by selling the product, oil and gas. The people at the top, the CEOs, the CFOs, they think in dollars and cents. They don't really think in barrels. And that's the engineers, that's the geologist's job is to think in barrels and then convert that into dollars.
Yeah.
And
that's really the reservoir engineer more than the geologist that does that exact transformation.
Yes, but it takes both. You can't effectively do a reservoir engineering job without really good teamwork between the geologist and the engineer.
Yeah, correct. So the geologist, and I'll jump in here really quick. So the geologist's job is we will go and map the subsurface, and we'll have different attributes that we care about, that we've had these penetrations into the ground that have provided us data and data points to be able to, expand our maps and to be able to, what we do is grid them together. So we have these points spread apart and we take values, different values, and sometimes the summations and the oil in place, these more derived numbers, we will go and map. And then over that rock unit, we'll kind of give you what we'll give you is kind of the sidebars and the data that went into it. Then we hand it to the reservoir engineer, and what do you guys do? What do you calculate?
Right. So from an economic standpoint, you got to come up with some sort of projection on how much oil, gas, water you're going to make out of it, which is where we get the data from you guys. And hopefully there are penetrations, there are wells around that have production that you can look at. That's not always the case. And if you don't have that the uncertainty around that is very, very high. Yeah. So you have to have very high confidence in the work that the geologist has done and also come up with a pretty conservative model with CapEx, with production, so that you know that you've got an economic project.
Right.
Some of that, if you don't have any penetrations, any wells, now you're looking at things like recovery factor. The geologist says, hey, we think there's 10 feet of Sophie H, or there's 10 million barrels in place per DSU. And you say, okay, well, if we drill one well in this, and it makes 500,000 barrels of oil, that's probably an economic project. And what would that be, a 5% recovery factor? So you can kind of infer from those things. If you do have production, which most unconventional plays today, it'd be unlikely you're going to go into a field and say, there's no production to look at. There's nothing.
Right.
Here.
Right.
So you will go in and the geologist gives you a rock unit. Like this is the basic outline of, we think this is all similar stuff. It's the same PVT. It's the same subsurface. It's the same strikes, dip.
A lot of comparisons. That was what I was going to jump in there. So when we don't have the production data to go with it, we're going to compare that rock, what it looks like, to other areas that did. And that's part of what we have to do. And that is kind of on the geology side, would be the ones that kind of go out and find similar rock with production in it, be able to like add that comparison.
Yeah, what is your analog? It's the analog
Right.
to Woodford in the Permian Basin. Can you analog that to the Mid-Con Basin?
Right.
I mean, that's a good question for you.
Right.
Can you do that? But let's say you've got wells, you've got production. You take all of the wells, and it's really a statistical, like these unconventionals, it's a statistical way to look at it. If you have the conventional world where you're looking for traps, structures, things like that, it's really not statistical. Now you're talking risk, like proper risk evaluation.
Yeah.
But focusing on the unconventional, you take 20, 30 wells, or however many wells you have on that, and you throw it into some probability plots, probit plots.
And so this is just plotting for the more layman out there. This is literally plotting the production over time from these individual wells.
Yes.
Right. And then what you want to do is kind of, and because again, I'm not the reservoir engineer, but I've had to kind of dumb it down for myself to understand. And then so what you do is you kind of you find the best fit. What describes the way that those curves, how do they end up, like the slope and all that matters. And then you kind of look at them and find out what you could expect on an average. Go into it from here.
Yeah, so you take all the wells, you time normalize them back to the start date. So you start time 0, and then so all of the wells start at the same time. You plot them all together, and you look at, you start high, it tails off, right? So the Arps equation is an attenuated hyperbolic decline. So you kind of look for that shape, and you're also looking for outliers. You're looking for what is the initial production on it, how big is the spread on it. So you've got a well that's really up here, well that's down here in the same subsurface block.
Yep.
You're something like you're asking these questions.
And that's the question that you come back to the geologist for. So why is this well overperforming relative to this one and these when we know that we perforated them all in the same thing? It's in this, assuming we all have similar rock. What's the differences in performance? And a lot of the time, that's when we will have some reservoir and geology talk.
Right. That's why it's really important to have that collaborative relationship between the two. You can't, it's a tale as old as time in oil and gas. Reservoir engineers and geologists, they don't really get along all that often.
Right. No, it's true. But we can. And like people like you and I that respect each other's discipline and kind of understand, when a geologist is, pie in the sky and everything is going to work, it makes it hard to stomach to somebody that actually has to put those numbers into action and go be the one that actually puts it in front of management. See, I can sit here as a geologist and say, this is awesome, it's this and that. But I do have to defend that, but I don't have to have the practical applicability of putting that dream into motion and selling it. I can see that's most of the tension I've seen is about who's more optimistic or not, to be honest.
Well, there's typically the geologist is the optimist and the engineer is the pessimist. It's typically. Yeah, I've worked with optimistic geos. I've worked with pessimistic geos.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of a pessimistic geo. I've been bit too many times, and that's kind of why a lot of the time I do get along with you guys. It's like, oh no, it's not going to work.
You drill a bad prospect, and it changes things on you.
Yeah. Well, and you put your own money in it too.
That's the truth. Let's say you've got this production profile, right? And it's got a spread. You take the average. It's a P50, so it's a probability. You take the P50 of it. You can also look at the average.
Yeah.
With that. And that becomes your type curve, your type well. Mm-hmm. So now you've got a production profile. Like we're going to make, and I'm making up numbers here, we're going to make 20,000 barrels of oil in the first month. We're going to make 15,000 barrels of oil in the second month. And it just, follows that.
On down to it's kind of, there's an asymptote in a lot of these wells where they kind of flatten out at a pretty consistent number for a long time.
Right. That's that attenuation at the tail. It just flattens at the end. So you've got a stream of hydrocarbons and water water's a cost. It's an expense. It's not profit. Yeah. But you have all of that. Now you make some assumptions, right? How much does it, and then these are qualified assumptions. How much does it cost to drill the well? If it's going to cost you $10 million, or $5 million, that changes how many barrels of oil you have to make to pay it back.
Right. And how fast? Right.
Yep. And then you need some operating expenses. How much does it cost to actually get this out of the ground? And what is the price of oil? Are you going to use a flat price? Are you going to use a strip price? Is it escalating? Is oil in contango? Like there's just all these questions that you have to ask and answer on it. And you can get a pretty reasonable feel for it and good bounds on what those things are. Because again, you've got analogs, you've got other wells in the field. What's your artificial lift method? Are you going to use an ESP? Is it going to rod lift? Are you going to gas lift? All of those things can't be quantified and rolled up into a number. And so you're changing a hydrocarbon stream into a cash flow stream. And now you have a cash flow stream that you can run your basic economic principles on it. Rate of return, what payout, how fast are we going to get all of our money back? Is it a 2-year payout? Is it a 6-month payout? These are important things. Different companies have different metrics that they chase. Some companies want high rate of return. Some companies want the maximum net present value. Some companies want the most recovery. They want the most oil out of the ground. Then you go to a state oil company, they don't really care about rate of return. They typically care about, we want the maximum recovery out of the ground possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I was just thinking that that's exactly right. So there is that kind of step where you do financialize the oil that's coming out of the ground, but there's also kind of a split there. But I wanted to talk really quick about the the kind of finance or the economic side. So you've got these wells, and you're able to now use that to determine your company's value, right? And so it's kind of an area under the curve kind of a thing. And you add all of these wells up in your operating expenses, and that's how you kind of come to the value and determine whether or not your oil company is working. Are you spending more money drilling these wells than you're going to make back in a reasonable amount of time, if at all? Hopefully we're not seeing a lot of that these days, but I've personally seen, expensive wells go into the ground that will never pay out. And you just, they're produced to stop the bleeding until it's truly just, uneconomic. But then there's another component here. So we look at and that's one step back from the company revenue. Let's look at the actual, you're looking at we look at these type curves, like you said. We know what to expect from these wells. That breaks off into a new component, which is the subsurface team, right? And so you've got the economic people, but we want more of this, right? Like we need to keep this happening. And so there are reservoir engineers that are a part of the team that help the geologists keep looking for it, taking the metrics, the economic metrics in mind, combining that with the geology to come up with new places to drill. Is that kind of a reasonable way to describe that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So the subsurface, you break that up into like-minded blocks of rock, right? And
yes.
And it could be wholly a rock properties thing. It could also be PVT. And as we saw in the Mid-Con, you can go a few miles away and your gas oil ratio goes from 1,000 to 20,000. And now you're not making really oil, you're making a lot of gas with the condensate on it.
Yes.
And you can encounter that in very short distances. You can also encounter that in great distances. So you make these type curve blocks, right?
That are based on similar rock types, production profiles, depth, pressure, oil and gas phase, whether it's oil, liquids, gas, that's the subsurface team kind of puts all these factors in. But at the end of the day, it still ties back to how much money these wells make.
Yeah, but like working with the geologists, like you identify those blocks and then you put type wells together to do that. And you come up with type curve areas for different companies call them different things.
And I do them. It's always not been my favorite thing. Yeah, I kind of left that with other people, but the type curve areas are good. And, a lot of the time it's kind of cool from the geologic perspective. Sometimes we have faults that kind of set areas up really nicely, or just, there's an unconformity or something like that, provides a different kind of trap for this block of rock or, whatever. There's a bunch of variables that go into all of this.
There's a lot of variables, and there's more variables than we can name at this point. Like those type curve areas, each one has a type curve that has an economic output to it. And you can high grade where we want to drill. Mm-hmm. If you have a pretty diverse PVT situation on your area, your acreage, if gas goes to $10 an MCF, you could pivot. You could drill gas.
Yeah.
And oil goes to $200 a barrel, you drill a bunch of oil. But you work with the geologist to come up with all of these things. And then the other question there is well count. How many wells do you get per spacing unit?
Yeah. And that's actually a really big one. I had a microseismic guy on. Let's talk a little bit about spacing, because that actually, again, that factors into reservoir both sides, the economics, big picture value of the company, and then again, the subsurface guys that are identifying and telling us where we want to drill the wells. So this is a great opportunity to kind of walk through. Let's start with the science and go, let's start with pulling core.
Yeah, core, man.
Yeah, let's start with pulling core. What do we do with subsurface team to determine these things?
Core solves all the questions.
Yeah.
I say
It's
that
not cheap.
as a picture physicist. I say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, well, if you want to go back to basic exploration, the first thing you do when you enter a field is you pull core, whole rock
Yeah.
core. You run all of the experiments on it. What's your Young's modulus? What's your bulk modulus?
And those have to do with how the rock breaks for the layman.
Yeah, I'm getting into the deep end with this stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
But the whole core, you run that. There's a number of different labs. Lumberjay used to have a good lab. They might still have a good lab. One of my favorite tools with logging and with lab work is NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance.
Yeah, my buddy Eric liked that a lot.
Yeah, to me that kind of tells you the whole story because you can there's tricks to it, but you can see where the water in the pores are and where the oil or gas is in the pore, the size of the pore, where it's at, the distribution of your pores, how easy it is to get the stuff out of the pores. This is a really powerful tool.
I was going to say that is a really powerful tool. I've actually been able to use it a couple times. Just real quick though, what's basically the science behind that? We send basically a giant magnet down there, more or less, and it affects the water essentially.
Yes. So
Because the water is the water's got the kind of dipole moment to it. So go ahead.
NMR is essentially the same thing as an MRI machine. And it's the same concept. You're applying a magnetic field. So there's a static magnetic field that polarizes hydrogens in one plane. So then you pulse a different magnetic field and it flips it. It flips the hydrogen over and you measure that. And you're doing this at the frequency of milliseconds. The logging tools that you put down the hole are milliseconds. In the lab, you're much more high frequency than that, but there's limitations.
Yeah, sure.
So you're flipping these hydrogens back and forth, and eventually they'll hit the pore wall and they spin out. So you can't polarize them anymore. You can't flip them. And so you're actually watching the
because they've got the kinetic energy kind of thing. So they hit the wall and they literally spin out.
So what you're actually watching is a decay in how many hydrogen molecules are spinning. And you can
Okay.
that is related to pore size. So the longer it takes to do that means you're farther away from a pore wall. Because you're hitting a pore wall, that's just what caused them to stop spinning.
Sure.
So
Sure.
you're essentially looking at a time distribution of how many hydrogens are spinning. There's a whole inversion process behind this to get to what you actually want to get to. But it's a really powerful thing. But functionally, it's the same thing as an MRI machine. You go take an MRI, it's doing the same thing.
Yep.
And it's specifically tuned to hydrogens.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I'm glad. If anything, that's the whole podcast right there. So
I am far from an NMR.
no, but that's cool, and it is. And so we have all kinds of fancy stuff that we send down these holes and tools to pull the actual whole rock out of it, and we send it to a lab and crush them up and send them through different machines and look at the chemical elements and look at the actual real porosity that could be measured with different techniques. What are those main techniques?
Oh, in the lab?
Yep.
Let's see, LPP, low pressure porosity porosimeter, is a method of it. And one of the most accurate ways to do it is actually to crush up the rock. You take the rock itself, you crush it up.
That's what I was just going to say.
Particles.
Yep.
And you run some helium through that. And you're actually looking at density. You have the bulk density of a composite piece of rock.
Yep.
So you know what the bulk density is. You crush it, so you know what the grain density is. And you assume it's filled with some sort of fluid. Those three numbers, you can calculate porosity. So you're looking at density.
Yep. And that's exactly right. And so again, back to the subsurface work, we kind of got off into the weeds and core and the science, but we need to characterize this rock. And so we're actually looking at the rock in the best ways that we can. And then we will take that information and compare that to the production, so to speak. Let's skip the production just yet. We look at this and we determine the real porosity is where is most of the oil in this section of rock? What is the most breakable rock? We need to understand what's the most breakable rock. And then this factor that factors in with the breakability is the clays. Because from my geologic perspective, we've got to understand our ability to to fracture stimulate these wells, and clay is your biggest enemy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So the triple combo log, which is what typically you run in these holes. If it's a science hole, you run more than that. But triple combo is typically what it is.
That's the basics.
Gamma ray, resistivity, neutron, density, porosity. Those
Yep.
are the big ones. There's other measurements in there. You might run SP. You might run
Anytime you do it now, you're going to have PE, you'll have SP, and those are the basics.
Yeah. So gamma ray is really, that's your tool to figure out where the clays are. There's more to it than that, but that's where it is. And these unconventionals, they call them hot shales, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a lot of gamma being expelled from it. And the tool itself is a passive tool, so it's just measuring gamma coming into it. It's not putting anything out. That's pretty important. So if you look at, say, Woodford, like the Woodford shale could have well over 2,000 units of gamma. I mean, it could be really, really hot. Whereas a clean limestone might have 5 to 10 units, API units, right? So you're kind of looking at that. That's your first indicator of, what does this rock actually look like? And there's certain limitations to that tool, right? What is the resolution of the tool, the gamma ray tool? It might measure something every half inch, but it's reporting a value every 6 inches. So what you're actually getting is an integration of the measurements every 6 inches, which there's limitations on that resolution. But on the other one, resistivity is, man, that's one of the most powerful logging tools there is.
That's the main one. That's the OG, that and SP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I forget their first name, but the two Schlumberger brothers came up with that first resistivity tool.
Yep.
Because on the surface, the high level of it, water is conductive to electricity.
Yep.
Oil is resistive to electricity. Yep. And so you're looking for anomalies. You're looking for outliers. Like the resistivity should be somewhat consistent over there, unless there's hydrocarbons inside there. And now you've got a resistant flow to it.
Yeah.
And you see those. So the problem with resistivity is it's also impacted by porosity. So they're related. Because what you're after here is water saturation. Like what percentage of your pore space is filled with water? If your pores are big, your resistivity profile looks different than if you're really small. Mm-hmm. So if you've got 20% porosity and you see 10 ohms, that's you're
still happy.
Yeah.
Very happy, as a matter of fact. That's a great
10
number.
ohms with 5% porosity, you're not very happy.
A different story. Yep. Let's go home.
So that's why you run the neutron and the density tools, which those
give us the basics. And that gives us our oil, water, or you can look at it either way, but these things, porosity, resistivity, gamma ray doesn't factor in, but it tells us other things. But we're able to calculate using Archie's equation that has some other little factors built in, but it's a common tool that every geologist and reservoir engineer uses. And we calculate like Wyatt was saying, the amount of oil or water in these reservoirs. So what's the next step from there? Now we have the porosity. What are we going to combine that with to start getting numbers to feed back to the economics people and the drill schedule?
So all of that rolls up into some sort of oil in place. Some people want the original oil in place, OIP number. Some people like looking at the SOFIH number, which is saturation times porosity times thickness.
Yep.
So you can look at
so those are the factors, though. That's what I was kind of getting into. So the thickness of the unit, really one of the most important things that's going to factor into how far and how wide. The porosity and the saturation, right? Like those are the main factors.
If you know those three numbers, you can get a very great estimate on what those things are.
And like you said, we calculate so we have this whole volume of rock and we want to know all of it. But the truth is what happens, we're not able to get all of that 100%. What's a recovery factor?
Yep. So recovery factor is simply the estimated ultimate recovery, or EUR, of the well divided by what is there originally, the original oil in place, or original gas in place. Whatever form of hydrocarbon you're after. And the form that your hydrocarbons are in the subsurface dictates or controls how much recovery factor you're going to be. So if you think about, there's all these different factors in there, but mobility is permeability over viscosity. That's what that is. So a good oil at a good reservoir temperature is probably in the 1 to 2 centipoise in viscosity.
Okay.
Whereas gas, it's actually hard to measure viscosity on gas because it's so, it just goes in.
It's not a liquid. Right.
So if you've got a pretty heavy oil, say 35 API, maybe 30 API, pretty thick stuff, a 10% recovery factor in a shale is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's just pretty good.
And that was what I was trying to get to. And that's where the shales and these other plays did come in, especially unconventionals, is that The idea is the vertical wells didn't get all the production. You can come in with the horizontal, fracture it more, and get a lot more. Shales are a little bit different, but we're actually starting to play the same game with, like you were saying in the Bakken, where we had early stage stem that didn't get everything. It kind of look at it as an old vertical well in a way. And you can go in and blast it with, these bigger jobs and get higher recoveries from that rock.
Yeah. And there's plenty of people doing recompletions all over,
Yeah.
not just in
Yeah.
the Williston Basin, all over.
Yeah, we even looked at it out there in that Western Anadarko deal that we did. And everybody looks at it, and especially the early ones, like you're saying. Another one that seems to be a good candidate is the Barnett, because that was like really, really early days, So
yeah, that was back in the days when you didn't wireline frac plugs down. You put them on coil.
you did. You put them on coil tubing and pumped them down.
You get 2 or 3 stages a day with that stuff. Now you can do 15, 20 stages a day.
Yeah, and did you see my podcast with Josh, the completions guy? Like he was saying, some of these jobs are insane. They'll have a central pumping farm essentially, and they'll do 2 wells at a time at 200 barrels apiece.
No way.
Yeah, no, it's crazy what they're doing out there. And then that other guy that I interviewed will go out and plug natural gas into that central facility and save them 80%, substitute 80% of the diesel that they're burning on those units with natural gas. That's pretty cool too.
That is pretty
cool. All ties together,
Yeah. Well, I know we want to talk about fracking, but
no, well, so we can come back and do it more, dude. We can come back and have a frack episode for sure.
The clay, like we're talking about logging and core, the clay is actually what is the biggest problem in shales. Yep. In shale.
Yep. Why is that? I mean, I know why, but why is that the clays are such an issue?
Well, it comes down to compliance.
They swell.
Ductility. Yeah. And some clays are better than others. Some clays are worse.
Yeah.
You know about the illite smectite transformation.
Yep.
So smectite is one of the most swellable clays that I know of. But at some point, at some depth and temperature and pressure, smectite converts to illite. Yep. And now it's not that swelling. I mean, it still swells, but it's not that bad. Were we on the platform? Is that where we found all that smectite?
Yes.
Yeah, on the Central Basin platform. We were too shallow, and so the smectite hadn't fully cooked into illite.
Right.
And so you pump a bunch of water into it, that stuff swells up, and your hydraulically stimulated fractures, your flow paths, they're not this big. They're minuscule.
Yeah.
Quick.
Well, and this all factors back into the economics because, for example, they swell with water, so we have to drill with oil-based mud, right? And so these all things factor that the subsurface team kind of figures out, kind of factor into the AFE, the authority for expenditure on these big wells. So, okay, well, so we've got this team and we've looked underground and we've looked at all this rock. And so we combine this, you start making oil in place maps. We look at those maps to come up with new drilling locations. And for those new drilling locations turn into value for the company also.
Yes.
And so we tie it all together that we come up with type curve areas here. We can prove it by looking at the rock. We come up with the amount of oil that we think we're going to get by drilling these wells. And that amount of oil is going to factor into how much it costs to get it and ultimately end up with a value for the company. So we've got the economic guys that look at how much it's worth, the guys that have to find more of it and explain, why it works. And then that all comes back to how much it's going to drill and how much that company is worth. It's kind of neat.
No, it is neat because there's value in producing wells. Like we know once a well is drilled and it's producing, we can get pretty dang close to how much oil and gas and revenue is going to make. But those type curves, they also play another role in reserves. And so the reserves of a company basically boils down to how many unproduced barrels does a company own.
Exactly.
And there's the whole process to this. There's auditors. The SEC has a whole bunch of rules and regulations on this. And some people really enjoy that process. I don't enjoy that process.
Right. That wouldn't be for me either. Yeah.
Because you've got these type curves, and let's say there's one well on a DSU, but you say you can put 6 in this space. So now there's 6 additional wells that are going to produce this amount of barrels, this much reserves.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's reservoir categories, like how do you actually classify them? So a producing well is proved, developed, producing.
Yep.
PDP.
Yep.
Well that is proven, like a proved reserve is a big deal. A proved that isn't drilled is proven undeveloped.
Yep. PUD.
Or PUD. And then you got your POSs, your probs, and they all get different multipliers on their value. So all of these wells, they roll up into some sort of net present value. PV10, a 10% discount rate, is what all these type curves, that's the main output that a lot of people look at, is what's the PV on this stuff. So if you've got a PUD, you might get 80% of a PDP.
Yep.
A probable might get 50%, and a possible get 20% of that. You do
this is all super important to the valuation of and future of the company.
Well, that's how you get to that number. So you take every single well that's producing, every single well that you think you can drill, apply this process to it, and that's an hour-long conversation about it. Yeah. But that all rolls up into one number, and you say, hey, we've got 10 million barrels of oil left to produce in this company. This many are PDP, this many are PUD. And you roll it up into a number and say, this company is worth this much money.
Boom. Now let's sell it. Right? That's pretty much the plan. So awesome, dude. Hey, well, we hit our mark, man. We're right at the 40-minute mark. I think we did really good today. I think we touched on all the subjects. I think you're going to need to come back on and maybe let's get into the completion side, or if we missed anything on this side. Why don't you give a little words of wisdom for everybody and we'll get going. Everybody has to give words of wisdom, dude.
I wasn't prepared for words of wisdom.
Well, we got to give them. So.
Let's see. Words of wisdom. Pressure. Pressure is the golden ticket. Pressure can overcome bad rock to a point.
Yeah.
If you can find areas with a lot of pressure, odds are it's going to be a good area.
Yeah. It's just on your lifting costs, and it comes to you. That's an exciting thing.
Well, so, bottom pressure, initial reservoir pressure, that's one of the largest factors in recovery factor.
I'm going to pitch my buddy who's been giving me a little bit of work. Brian McDowell from Sabata Energy Consultants is compiling bottom hole pressures, mud stuff. He's got all kinds of things. He's actually in Oklahoma City today and tomorrow. Check his LinkedIn. I'm just randomly bumping my buddy, but he's here, and that's the exact kind of data he's selling. You ought to talk to him at some point, dude, for real. And he just got back from North Dakota with a bunch of data. So you ought to get, I need to put you in touch with him.
Yes, so grab coffee or something.
Awesome. Well, I'm having coffee with him in the morning, dude. You want to come?
Yeah.
I'll get with you after this. Awesome. All right. Hey, well, thanks for coming, Wyatt, a good friend of mine. We're going to close this out. My name's Keith Carden. This is the Grizzled Geologist. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, come and watch some more of the shows. And to all you reservoir engineers out there, geologists matter too. Later.
You have to work for it. Don't be crazy. And work for your money.